Jake Morrison sat in his chair and tried not to show his anger. The big alien with 6 arms was talking again, and the translator box was making its voice sound even more annoying than usual. For 3 years, Jake had listened to these creatures tell humans what they could and could not do. Every single meeting was the same thing over and over again. The aliens would complain about something humans did. Then they would suggest ways to fix it that always made humans weaker. The room was huge and cold, just like all the other rooms on this space station. The Galactic Council liked to make everything big to show how important they were. Jake looked around at all the different aliens sitting in their fancy chairs. There was the bug-like creature from the Velkari system, the floating jellyfish thing from Zephyr, and the tall gray ones who never seemed to blink. They all thought they were better than humans, and they never let humans forget it. Captain Lisa Grant sat next to Jake, and he could see she was getting angry too. Her job was to explain human military actions to the Council, but they never listened, anyway. They had already decided that humans were too violent, too dangerous, and too stupid to make their own choices. Every time humans built a new ship or defended a colony, the aliens complained about it. Today was worse than usual. The jellyfish alien was reading a long list of complaints about human behavior. It said humans were expanding too fast, building too many weapons, and not following Council rules properly. The worst part was when it suggested that humans needed babysitters. The alien called them advisors, but everyone knew what it really meant. The Council wanted to put their own people in charge of human colonies and human fleets. Jake had been a diplomat for 20 years, and he had never heard anything so insulting. The other humans in the room were all looking at him, waiting to see what he would do. Some of them looked scared, some looked angry, and some just looked tired. They were all thinking the same thing, though. This had gone on long enough. The bug creature started talking next, and its voice made clicking sounds that the translator could barely handle. It was saying that humans needed to be more grateful for Council protection. It reminded everyone that the Council had saved humanity from several wars and had shared advanced technology with them. What it did not mention was that the Council had started those wars in the first place, and the technology came with strings attached that made humans dependent on alien approval for everything. Jake knew things that the Council thought he did not know. Human intelligence agents had been busy for months, and they had discovered some very interesting facts. The Council had been sabotaging human trade routes to make humans look incompetent. They had been bribing pirates to attack human ships, then offering protection in exchange for giving up human rights. Most importantly, they had been planning to forcibly move human colonies that were becoming too successful and independent. The tall gray alien spoke next, and its voice was like ice. It suggested that humans should accept Council oversight for their own good. It said that young species like humans could not be trusted to make important decisions without guidance from their betters. The other aliens all made agreeing noises, and Jake realized that this was not a negotiation anymore. This was a trial, and the verdict had already been decided. Lisa Grant caught Jake's eye and nodded slightly. She had seen the same intelligence reports, and she knew what they meant. The Council was not trying to help humanity grow and develop. They were trying to control humanity completely, and they would use any excuse to do it. The protection they offered was really just a pretty word for slavery. Jake stood up slowly, and the entire room went quiet. All the aliens stopped talking and stared at him. Some of them looked surprised because humans were not supposed to speak unless they were asked a direct question. Jake did not care about their rules anymore. He had spent 3 years being polite and diplomatic, and it had gotten humanity nowhere except deeper into a trap. The United Earth Federation withdraws from these negotiations, Jake said clearly. His voice carried across the huge room without any help from the translator systems. We thank the Council for their time, but we are done talking. The silence that followed was complete and absolute. Jake could hear his own heartbeat and the soft humming of the air recycling systems. The aliens all stared at him like he had just said something impossible. No species had ever walked away from Council negotiations before. The very idea seemed to break their understanding of how the universe worked. Jake nodded to Lisa and the other humans in the room. One by one, they stood up and followed him toward the exit. Their footsteps echoed in the huge chamber, and not one alien said a word to stop them. They were too shocked to even try. As the last human left the room, Jake heard the first confused voices starting to babble behind them. The council was about to learn that humans did not need their permission to leave, and they definitely did not need their permission to survive. The council chamber stayed quiet for almost a full minute after the humans left. Chancellor Vorthak was the first alien to find his voice, but it came out as a strangled whisper. His blue skin had turned an ugly purple color, which meant he was either very angry or very scared. Maybe both. They cannot just leave, he said to his aide, a smaller creature that looked like a walking stick insect. No species has ever walked away from council mediation. It is not possible. It is not allowed. The aide made nervous clicking sounds and shuffled through its datapad, looking for some rule or law that would explain what had just happened. There was nothing. In 3,000 years of council history, every species had always begged to be included in negotiations. Some had been rejected, some had been punished, and some had been forced to wait centuries for approval. But none had ever simply said no and walked away. Dr. Sam Peterson was still in the chamber, packing up his research materials from a side table. He was supposed to leave with the rest of the human delegation, but someone needed to collect all the scientific data they had been sharing with the council. Sam was a xenobiologist, which meant he studied alien life forms, and he found the council's reaction almost as interesting as the creatures he normally examined. The jellyfish alien from Zephyr was floating in frantic circles, its tentacles flashing, different colors rapidly. Sam had learned that this meant extreme agitation. The bug creature from Velkari was making high-pitched screeching sounds that the translators could not handle properly. The tall gray aliens just sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the door where the humans had gone. "This changes nothing," declared Counselor Thexera, trying to sound confident. "Humans are a primitive species. They will realize their mistake and return within days, begging for forgiveness." Sam almost laughed out loud at that. If these aliens knew what he knew, they would not be so sure about anything. He finished packing his equipment and headed for the door, but he walked slowly, enough to hear more of their conversation. "We must send a fleet to human space immediately," suggested the bug creature. "Show them the consequences of defying the council." "No," said Chancellor Vorthak. "We wait. Let them feel the isolation first. When their trade routes collapse and their colonies start failing, they will come back grateful for any terms we offer." Sam finally reached the door and left the chamber, but he could still hear them arguing as he walked down the corridor. They really had no idea what they were dealing with. The council had been so focused on controlling humanity that they had never bothered to understand humanity. Meanwhile, aboard the human transport ship Endeavour, Admiral Kate Russell was reviewing classified files in her private cabin. The ship was already moving away from the council station at maximum speed, but Kate was not thinking about their escape. She was thinking about what came next. The files in front of her contained information that would have shocked the council members if they had known about it. Human intelligence agents had been very busy over the past year, and they had discovered things that changed everything. The council was not just annoying or condescending. They were actively working to destroy human independence. "Commander Rick." Hayes knocked on her cabin door and entered when she called for him to come in. Rick was her most trusted aide, and one of the few people who knew the full truth about why they had really left the negotiations. "The alien communications are going crazy," Rick reported. "They're sending emergency messages to every council member species. Most of them seem confused about what just happened." Kate nodded and handed him one of the files. "Show them this. One first. The trade route sabotage report." Rick opened the file and read quickly. His expression grew darker with each page. The report detailed how council agents had been paying pirates to attack human merchant ships, then offering council protection services that came with impossible conditions. Humans who accepted the protection found themselves unable to trade with non-council species, unable to expand their businesses, and unable to make decisions without council approval. "They were setting up a trap," Rick said quietly. "A very clever trap," Kate agreed, "and we almost walked right into it. But that's not the worst part." She handed him another file, this one marked with the highest security classification. Rick's face went pale as he read about the forced relocation plan. The Council had been preparing to move successful human colonies to different star systems, claiming it was for their own protection. The real reason was to break up human communities that were becoming too independent and prosperous. They wanted to scatter us across the galaxy, Rick whispered. Keep us divided and weak. Kate pulled up a star chart on her wall display. It showed human space as it existed now, with dozens of thriving colonies connected by trade routes and mutual defense agreements. Then she showed him the Council's proposed new map, with human settlements spread thin across distant systems, isolated from each other, and dependent on Council goodwill for everything. We would have become slaves without even realizing it, Kate said. Generation by generation, humans would have forgotten what freedom looked like. Rick stared at the displays for a long moment. So what do we do now? Kate smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. Now we show the galaxy what humans can really do when we're not pretending to be grateful for scraps from the Council table. She activated her communications console and began sending coded messages to human colonies, human fleet commanders, and human intelligence agents throughout known space. The messages were simple and identical. Phase 2 is now active. Back on the Council station, the emergency session was getting louder and more chaotic. Different species were blaming each other for the human departure, and nobody could agree on what to do about it. Some wanted immediate military action, others wanted economic sanctions, and a few were even suggesting that maybe the humans had a point. None of them noticed that their quantum communication networks had started experiencing small technical problems. Human technicians had been maintaining those systems for months, and now those technicians were nowhere to be found. It would be weeks before the Council realized just how much they had come to depend on human expertise, and by then, it would be far too late to fix their mistake. 3 months after the walkout, Captain Ben Torres stood on the observation deck of Kepler 7 trade station and watched the busiest space traffic he had ever seen. Ships from dozens of different species were coming and going constantly, and most of them were not Council members. The station had been jointly built by humans and the Corvani merchants 2 years ago, but back then, it was just a small outpost for trading basic supplies. Now it looked like the center of a new galaxy. Ben had been running cargo ships for 15 years, and he had never seen anything like this. Every docking bay was full, and there was a waiting list that stretched for weeks. The Corvani were working around the clock to expand the station, adding new sections and upgrading the power systems. They had gone from being a minor trading partner to humanity's closest allies almost overnight. The reason for all the activity was simple. Non-Council species had been waiting for centuries for a chance to trade freely without Council interference, and humanity had given them that chance. The trade agreements humans offered were fair, straightforward, and did not come with hidden conditions that would trap smaller species in debt or dependence. Captain Torres watched a Helix freighter dock at Bay 7, followed by a Mordian exploration vessel at Bay 12. Both species had been trying to join the Council for decades, but they had always been rejected for being too primitive or too aggressive. Now they were here making deals with humans and finding prosperity they had never imagined possible. The first sign that the Council was getting worried came in the form of an official trade sanctions announcement. All Council member species were forbidden from conducting business with humanity or any human allies. The penalty for breaking this rule was immediate expulsion from the Council and loss of all trading privileges with Council space. The sanctions had exactly the opposite effect that the Council intended. Instead of isolating humanity, they isolated the Council. Species that had been on the fence about dealing with humans suddenly realized that the Council was trying to control their choices through threats and intimidation. Many of them decided they preferred human friendship to Council bullying. Dr. Amy Chen received the first desperate communication from Council space exactly 97 days after the walkout. It came from a Zephyrian medical facility that had been using human healing technology to treat a plague that was spreading through their outer colonies. The plague was not deadly, but it caused severe pain and disability that could last for years. Human medical devices could cure it completely in just a few hours. The Zephyrian doctor who contacted Amy was almost crying as he explained the situation. His people were suffering, and the council had forbidden him from requesting human assistance. He was willing to risk expulsion from the council if it meant saving his patients, but he needed Amy to help him find a way to get the medical equipment without breaking too many laws. Amy listened to his plea with mixed feelings. She genuinely wanted to help the sick Zephyrians, but she also knew that this was exactly what the council deserved. They had spent 3 years treating humans like children who could not be trusted with advanced technology, and now they were discovering what life was like without that technology. "I understand your situation," Amy told the doctor, "but I cannot provide medical assistance to council member species. However, the Independent Trade Consortium has an excellent medical program that might be able to help you." The Independent Trade Consortium was humanity's new alliance with non-council species. It had been formed just 6 weeks after the walkout, and it was growing faster than anyone had expected. The consortium offered mutual defense agreements, fair trade policies, and shared technology programs to any species that wanted to join. The only requirement was that members had to treat each other as equals. Senator Paul White stood before the Earth Assembly and delivered his monthly report on galactic affairs. The assembly chamber was packed with representatives from every human colony, and Paul could see excitement and pride on their faces as he spoke. "The council believed that we needed them more than they needed us," Paul said. "They were wrong. In the past 3 months, we have established trade relationships with 47 non-council species. Our economy is growing faster than ever before. Our colonies are safer than they have ever been, and our technology development has accelerated beyond all previous projections." The assembly erupted in applause, but Paul raised his hand for silence. He was not finished yet. "More importantly, we have learned something about ourselves. We discovered that we do not need anyone's permission to be free, we do not need anyone's approval to be successful, and we definitely do not need anyone's protection to be safe. We have also discovered that there are many other species in this galaxy who feel the same way." Paul activated a holographic display that showed the current political map of known space. Council territory was marked in red, and it looked smaller than it had just 3 months ago. Several species had formally withdrawn from council membership to join the Independent Trade Consortium, and others were considering it. "The council's greatest mistake was assuming that power comes from control," Paul continued. "They never understood that real power comes from cooperation. They tried to rule through fear and dependency, but we have shown the galaxy that there is another way." Back in council space, the emergency sessions were happening every day now, and they were getting more desperate each time. Chancellor Vorthak had lost weight, and his blue skin looked gray and unhealthy. The stress of watching his galactic empire crumble was taking a physical toll on him. The quantum communication networks were failing more frequently, and council technicians could not figure out how to fix them. The networks had been designed with human help, and the humans had apparently included security features that prevented unauthorized repairs. Without reliable communications, the council was having trouble coordinating responses to the growing crisis. Worse yet, reports were coming in from across council space about independence movements and rebellions. Species that had been loyal council members for centuries were starting to question whether their membership was really worth the cost. The council's harsh response to these movements only made things worse, as more species began to see the council as oppressive rather than protective. Chancellor Vorthak stared at the reports piling up on his desk and realized that everything was falling apart. The humans had been gone for only 3 months, but their absence had created a hole in the galactic order that was growing larger every day. Something had to be done soon, or there would be no council left to save. 6 months had passed since the humans walked away, and Councillor Nextar was having trouble sleeping. His hive mind species normally shared thoughts and emotions across millions of individuals, but lately those shared feelings had been full of anxiety and confusion. The collective consciousness that had once felt so strong and unified was now fractured by doubt and fear. Nextar stood before the council assembly and tried to project confidence, but his mandibles kept clicking nervously. The sound echoed through the chamber, and he knew that every other council member could hear his distress. In the old days, such a display of weakness would have been unthinkable, but these were not the old days anymore. "The humans will return," he announced for what felt like the 100th time. "They are too primitive to survive without our guidance. Their alliance with the lesser species cannot last." His words sounded hollow even to himself. The reports coming in from across the galaxy told a very different story. The Independent Trade Consortium was not just surviving, it was thriving in ways that made the Council's own success look pitiful by comparison. The latest intelligence update was sitting on the table in front of him, and every page made for worse reading than the last. The Corvin Mining Guild, one of the Council's oldest and most profitable allies, had been holding secret negotiations with humanity for weeks. The Corvins controlled some of the richest mineral deposits in known space, and losing them would be an economic disaster for the Council. Even worse, 3 minor species had formally applied for membership in the human consortium. The applications had been processed and approved within days, while similar applications to join the Council typically took decades and often ended in rejection. The speed and efficiency of the human system made the Council's bureaucracy look bloated and incompetent. Admiral Tony Brooks had just finished broadcasting a message that was being transmitted to every inhabited system in the galaxy. The broadcast showed off humanity's new defense grid, a network of automated stations and mobile platforms that could protect human space from any conceivable threat. The technology was clearly generations ahead of anything the Council possessed, and the implications were terrifying. Nextar had watched the broadcast 3 times, and each viewing made him more afraid. The defensive systems were impressive enough, but the real message was much more disturbing. Humanity was not hiding or running away from the galaxy. They were announcing to everyone that they were here to stay. They were stronger than ever, and they were ready to defend their new allies against any threat. The broadcast also included testimonials from species that had joined the consortium. A Helix captain talked about how human protection had allowed his people to explore dangerous regions of space that had been off-limits for centuries. A Mordian scientist described how human research sharing had advanced her civilization by decades in just a few months. Most damaging of all, a former Council client species explained how they had found more freedom and prosperity under human alliance than they had ever experienced under Council protection. Director Helen Stone appeared on every major communication network at exactly the same time, delivering a coordinated information attack that hit the Council like a sledgehammer. She was the head of human intelligence, and she had been saving her best ammunition for this moment. The data package she released contained detailed documentation of Council corruption going back centuries. There were records of forced relocations, economic manipulation, military intimidation, and political assassination. Species across the galaxy learned that their beloved Council had been lying to them, stealing from them, and controlling them through fear and deception. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Financial records showed how the Council had been artificially inflating prices for essential goods, while secretly controlling the companies that sold them. Military reports revealed how Council peacekeeping forces had been starting conflicts, so they could offer protection services to both sides. Political documents proved that Council elections had been rigged for generations, with outcomes predetermined by a small group of powerful species. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The proud Altarian Collective, which had been a Council member for over 1,000 years, sent a formal protest demanding answers. They had discovered that their voluntary membership had been secured through threats against their colony worlds, threats that had been carefully hidden from their government. Similar revelations sparked independence movements across Council space. Species that had never questioned their membership suddenly realized they had been prisoners in a system designed to exploit them. The Council's response was predictably heavy-handed, sending military forces to suppress the protests and arrest the leaders of independence movements. This brutal crackdown only made things worse. Images of Council troops firing on peaceful protesters spread across the galaxy, faster than the Council could suppress them. Species that had been considering leaving the Council made their decisions immediately. Others that had never thought about independence began planning their escapes. Chancellor Vorthak watched his empire crumbling in real time. Each day brought new reports of defections, rebellions, and diplomatic disasters. The hegemony, which had been the Council's military backbone for centuries, was facing internal revolts as their own people learned the truth about their government's actions. The final blow came when the Altarian Collective announced their formal withdrawal from the Council. They cited irreconcilable differences regarding basic principles of governance and declared their intention to seek membership in the Independent Trade Consortium. The Altarians were not just any council member. They were one of the founding species, one of the most respected civilizations in known space, and their departure would encourage others to follow. Vorthak called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors. The conference room was smaller than the main assembly chamber, but it felt just as cold and empty. The beings sitting around the table represented the last loyal core of the council, and even they looked frightened and uncertain. "We must act decisively," declared General Kethmar of the Military Council. "Send fleets to human space. Show them the consequences of defying our authority." "With what fleets?" asked Finance Minister Yolandra bitterly. "Half our member species have stopped paying their contributions. The other half are threatening to leave if we take military action. Our own forces are dealing with rebellions in a dozen systems." Vorthak stared at the tactical display showing the current state of Council territory. Red indicators marked systems in open revolt. Yellow showed regions with significant unrest, and green represented areas that were still loyal. There was far more red and yellow than green, and the green areas were scattered and isolated. "I will go to human space personally," Vorthak announced suddenly. "I will negotiate directly with their leaders. Surely they can be made to see reason." His advisors stared at him in shock. A chancellor of the Galactic Council did not travel to negotiate with rebellious primitives. It was unprecedented, undignified, and dangerous. But then again, everything about this situation was unprecedented. "If you go there as a supplicant, you will validate their position," warned General Kethmar. "You will be admitting that the Council needs them more than they need us." Vorthak laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "General, I think we passed that point about 5 months ago." The human colony of New Horizon looked nothing like what Chancellor Vorthak had expected. He had visited dozens of worlds throughout his long career, and they all followed the same basic pattern. The most important buildings were the biggest and most impressive, designed to show the power and wealth of whoever was in charge. Government centers were always surrounded by walls and guards, with layers of security that kept ordinary citizens at a safe distance from their leaders. New Horizon was different. The government building was practical and efficient, but it was not particularly large or decorated. There were no walls around it, no guards at the entrance, and people seemed to walk in and out freely. Vorthak found this casual approach to security both puzzling and slightly insulting. Did the humans not understand that he was the leader of the most powerful political organization in the galaxy? Governor Alex Murphy met Vorthak at the spaceport personally, which was a gesture of respect that the Chancellor appreciated. Murphy had been a diplomat before becoming a colonial administrator, and he understood the importance of proper protocol. However, the meeting itself was held in a simple conference room rather than the grand halls that Vorthak was accustomed to. The human delegation was small and informal. Besides Governor Murphy, there was Captain Nicole Davis representing the military, Dr. Robert Kim from the Science Division, and Trade Representative Linda Fox. They sat across from Vorthak and his advisors at a plain wooden table, drinking coffee from ceramic mugs instead of the elaborate ceremonial beverages that usually accompanied diplomatic meetings. Vorthak had prepared his opening position carefully during the long journey to human space. He would be firm, but reasonable, showing the humans that the Council was willing to forgive their childish behavior, if they were willing to accept some basic restrictions on their future actions. The restrictions were detailed in a comprehensive document that his legal team had spent weeks preparing. "The Galactic Council is prepared to welcome humanity back with full honors," Vorthak began, activating a holographic display that showed the proposed agreement. "These terms are more generous than any previously offered to a species of your developmental level." The document was indeed comprehensive. It contained over 1,000 pages of detailed regulations covering every aspect of human society. Military forces would be limited to specific numbers and confined to designated areas. Trade relationships would require council approval before they could be implemented. Colonial expansion would be subject to council oversight and environmental review. Scientific research would need to be shared with council authorities to ensure it was being used responsibly. Governor Murphy read through the document carefully, occasionally asking questions about specific clauses or requesting clarification on technical terms. His questions were polite and professional, but Vorthak began to sense that something was wrong. The human was not showing the gratitude and relief that the Chancellor had expected. If anything, Murphy seemed almost amused by the whole situation. "Captain." Davis was less diplomatic in her reaction. She produced her own document and placed it on the table in front of Vorthak. It was much thinner than the Council's proposal, but the Chancellor's expression changed dramatically as he read through it. The human document contained detailed analysis of every Council military asset, defensive position, and technological capability. It included accurate assessments of troop strengths, fleet compositions, and strategic vulnerabilities. Most disturbing of all, it contained information that should have been classified at the highest levels of Council security. "How did you obtain this information?" Vorthak demanded, his blue skin turning a darker shade that indicated serious distress. "We have been watching and learning for a very long time," Captain Davis replied calmly. "Did you really think we would sit in those council meetings for 3 years without paying attention to what was happening around us?" The implications hit Vorthak like a physical blow. Human intelligence agents had been operating throughout Council space for years, gathering information and building networks while the Council treated them like harmless primitives. The level of sophistication required for such operations suggested that human capabilities had been seriously underestimated from the beginning. Dr. Kim contributed the next shock to Vorthak's rapidly crumbling worldview. He activated his own holographic display and showed a technical readout that made the Chancellor's advisors gasp in surprise. It was a functioning faster-than-light communication system that operated without any Council technology or infrastructure. "The Council told us that instantaneous communication across galactic distances was impossible," Dr. Kim explained. "You were either lying or ignorant. Either way, it means we no longer need your communication networks to coordinate our activities." This revelation was perhaps more devastating than the military intelligence. The Council's power had always been based on their control of information and communication. Species that wanted to talk to each other had to go through Council networks, which meant the Council could monitor, intercept, or block any message they chose. Humanity had just announced that they were no longer dependent on this system. Trade. Representative Fox presented the economic data that completed Vorthak's education in human capabilities. The Independent Trade Consortium was not just surviving without Council participation, it was dramatically outperforming Council projections for economic growth. Trade volumes, technological development, and standard of living improvements were all exceeding anything the Council had achieved in centuries. "You seem to misunderstand the situation," Governor Murphy said gently. "We did not leave the Council because we were angry or emotional. We left because we no longer needed you." The words were spoken quietly and politely, but they hit Vorthak with more force than any military weapon could have managed. The Council's entire identity was based on the assumption that other species needed their guidance, protection, and approval. The idea that a species could not just survive but thrive without Council involvement was almost impossible for him to process. Vorthak tried to recover his diplomatic composure and made one final attempt to salvage the negotiation. "Surely there must be some arrangement we can reach. The Council has much to offer humanity in terms of trade opportunities, scientific collaboration, and mutual defense. What exactly do you have to offer?" asked Captain Davis. "Your trade networks are closed to non-members and controlled by your political priorities. Your scientific institutions are focused on maintaining technological advantages rather than advancing knowledge. Your military protection comes with conditions that amount to surrender of sovereignty. The Chancellor looked around the table at the human faces watching him with patient attention. They were not angry or hostile, but they were also not intimidated or impressed by his presence. They were treating him like any other visitor who had come to discuss business, not like the representative of galactic civilization itself. "What do you want from us?" Vorthak asked finally, abandoning his prepared negotiating strategy. Governor Murphy smiled, and for the first time since the meeting began, he seemed genuinely pleased. "We want you to dissolve the hierarchical council system and replace it with a democratic federation where all species have equal representation. We want an end to the forced relocations, economic manipulation, and political intimidation that have characterized council policy for centuries. We want a galaxy where cooperation is voluntary and benefits are shared fairly." Vorthak stared at the human governor in complete silence. The demands were not just unacceptable, they were revolutionary. What Murphy was describing would not be a reform of the council system. It would be the complete destruction of everything the council represented, and its replacement with something entirely new. "That is impossible," Vorthak said finally. "Then we have nothing more to discuss," Murphy replied, standing up and extending his hand for a farewell handshake. "Thank you for coming all this way, Chancellor. I hope your journey home is safe and pleasant." 1 year after humanity walked away from the council negotiations, Fleet Admiral Chris Parker stood on the command deck of the starship Liberty and watched history being made. Through the massive viewing windows, he could see ships from 43 different species gathered in formation around the neutral station, where the first United Systems Federation Assembly was about to convene. The old Galactic Council had effectively collapsed 6 months ago when the last of the founding species withdrew their membership. The hegemony, the Velkari Collective, and even the stubborn Zephyrians had finally admitted that their 1,000-year-old system was beyond repair. What remained of the Council controlled less than 30 systems and had no real authority over anyone. The new Federation was built on completely different principles. Every member species had an equal vote regardless of their size, military strength, or economic power. Decisions required genuine consensus rather than dictates from powerful elites. Most importantly, membership was entirely voluntary and could be revoked by any species at any time for any reason. Dr. Laura White walked through the corridors of the Federation station and marveled at what she saw. Beings from dozens of different worlds were working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old system. A team of Altarian engineers was collaborating with human scientists to develop new propulsion technologies. Corvin miners were sharing geological data with Helix explorers to identify promising worlds for colonization. Mordian philosophers were debating ethics and governance with representatives from species that had been their enemies just months before. The scientific progress alone was staggering. When species shared knowledge freely instead of hoarding it for competitive advantage, innovation accelerated beyond anyone's wildest predictions. Medical breakthroughs were curing diseases that had plagued entire civilizations for centuries. Environmental restoration techniques were bringing dead worlds back to life. Space exploration was reaching into regions of the galaxy that had never been visited by intelligent beings. Laura had been appointed as the Federation's first science coordinator, a position that required her to facilitate research cooperation between species with vastly different approaches to learning and discovery. It was challenging work, but also incredibly rewarding. Every day brought new insights and unexpected solutions to problems that had seemed impossible to solve. The political transformation was just as remarkable as the scientific advancement. Species that had spent generations fighting over resources and territory were finding ways to share and cooperate instead. The Federation's conflict resolution protocols were based on mediation and compromise rather than threats and intimidation. When disputes arose, they were settled through negotiation and mutual agreement rather than force. Chancellor Vorthak had been stripped of his former power and title, but he was not dead or imprisoned. The Federation offered membership to all species under the same terms, including those that had been part of the old council hierarchy. Vorthak now served as a junior representative for his people, working to rebuild relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. He found himself in the uncomfortable position of learning how to function in a system where his opinions carried no more weight than anyone else's. It was a humbling experience for someone who had spent centuries believing that some species were naturally superior to others. However, he was also discovering that cooperation produced better results than domination ever had. In a private conversation with Ambassador Jake Morrison, Vorthak finally admitted the magnitude of his previous mistakes. They were sitting in a small cafe on the Federation station, sharing a meal and talking like ordinary beings rather than representatives of vast political systems. "We thought you needed our approval," Vorthak said quietly, staring into his cup of Altarian tea. "We never realized that what the galaxy truly needed was your example." Jake nodded thoughtfully. The council was not evil exactly, but it was based on the idea that some species were meant to rule and others were meant to follow. That kind of thinking always leads to abuse and corruption, even when it starts with good intentions. "How did you know?" Vorthak asked. "How? Did your people understand what we were doing when we did not understand it ourselves?" Jake smiled sadly. "Because humans have made the same mistakes throughout our own history. We have created empires and hierarchies and systems of control that seemed reasonable at the time. We learned the hard way that real strength comes from voluntary cooperation, not forced submission." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement that the Federation Assembly was about to begin its afternoon session. Jake and Vorthak walked together toward the main chamber, where representatives from all member species would debate and vote on proposals for expanding exploration into uncharted regions of the galaxy. The chamber itself was designed to reflect Federation values. Instead of elevated platforms and symbolic thrones, there were simple chairs arranged in concentric circles so that everyone could see and hear each other easily. The acoustics were designed to carry every voice clearly without need for amplification or translation technology, though such systems were available for species that required them. Fleet Admiral Parker took his seat with the other military representatives and listened as the session began. The first item on the agenda was a proposal to establish joint exploration missions to investigate mysterious energy readings from the galactic core. The proposal had been submitted jointly by human, Altarian, and Corvan scientists who believed the readings might indicate the presence of previously unknown intelligent species. The debate that followed was passionate but respectful. Some representatives worried about the risks of contacting unknown beings who might be hostile or dangerous. Others argued that the potential for peaceful contact and knowledge sharing outweighed the risks. Still others suggested that the Federation had a moral obligation to investigate, since any intelligent species deserved the opportunity to join the galactic community if they chose to do so. After 2 hours of discussion, the proposal was approved by unanimous consent. The exploration mission would be organized as a joint venture with volunteers from all interested species. Command would rotate between different species to ensure that no single group dominated the mission. All discoveries would be shared freely with the entire Federation. Dr. White watched the vote with satisfaction. This was exactly the kind of decision that would have been impossible under the old council system. The council would have either forbidden the exploration entirely as too dangerous or claimed exclusive rights to any discoveries for the benefit of the most powerful species. The Federation approach was more complex and required more discussion, but it produced better results that everyone could support. As the assembly session continued, Admiral Parker reflected on how much had changed in just 1 year. The galaxy was no longer divided between rulers and subjects, between the powerful and the powerless, between the civilized and the primitive. Species that had been enemies were becoming friends. Trade was flowing freely across political boundaries, and scientific knowledge was advancing faster than ever before. The transformation had not been easy or painless. The collapse of the old system had created chaos and uncertainty in many regions. Some species had struggled to adapt to freedom after centuries of dependence on council guidance. Others had tried to take advantage of the transition period to settle old scores or grab resources from their neighbors. However, the Federation's response to these challenges had proven the strength of its founding principles. Instead of using military force to impose order, the Federation had offered assistance, mediation, and support to help struggling species find their own solutions. Instead of punishing former enemies, they had offered membership, and partnership. To anyone willing to embrace the values of cooperation and equality, the meeting ended with the traditional Federation closing ceremony. Representatives from all member species stood together and spoke the words that had become the foundation of their new civilization. We are one galaxy, many voices, united in freedom. Jake Morrison walked out of the chamber and headed toward the observation deck where he liked to think about the future. Through the transparent aluminum windows, he could see the ships of the Federation fleet preparing for their various missions. Some were heading out on exploration voyages. Others were carrying trade goods and scientific equipment to distant worlds. And still others were on their way to help species that were still struggling with the transition from the old system to the new one. The galaxy was finally free to reach its true potential, and it had all begun with a simple decision. Sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was simply say no and walk away from a bad situation. Sometimes the best way to win was to refuse to play by rules that were designed to make you lose. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force or cunning or superior technology. They had liberated it by demonstrating that there was a better way to live, a better way to govern, and a better way to treat other intelligent beings. The greatest victory was not the one achieved through conflict, but the one that made conflict unnecessary.